presentation.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. Okay. So we did touch on context, but I would like to bring this slide into a little bit more perspective here. There is quite a bit that's happening in this area, and this is why we felt that the scale and size of development was actually appropriate. We are very close, for those that don't know Hamilton very well, to Westdale Village, which is to the north. We are also close to, we have elementary school of Dalewood and the Dalewood Recreation Center also to the west of us. As Matt had noted, there's a future LRT stop that is planned across from the street from our development. Access to the 403 McMaster University campus is to the west, just off the screen, within about a kilometer distance. And as Matt also had noted, the McMaster Innovation Center. And Westdale Secondary School, which is just at the corner where it says C3 on the page. So I think when we were looking at the site as a whole, as a context, we saw there was so much potential. There's so many different amenities and activities that are in this area, employment lands, that density makes sense for where we are with the site. Next slide, Matt, please. So this is just, again, just highlighting our site. I think we can skip this one, Matt. I think we're all aware of where that site is now. Just a general massing and showing kind of how the building sited within the context. You can see the Camelot Towers to the right of that. Westdale, sorry, to the left is Camelot Towers. To the right is Westdale School, and the Innovation Park is just to the south of us. You can see as we cross the bridge. Next one, Matt, please. When we're looking at this, essentially, we're very careful and considerate about shadow impact and massing. The shadow study that we have provided essentially highlights the as of right, and then we also then show the net gain shadow. And it was concluded that through the shadow assessment that there was no new net impact of shadow onto the adjacent properties. It is important to, however, note that the properties to the north of our site, from what I understand, have been expropriated for the LRT corridor as it is. So they are, even though they do appear in the mapping here as perhaps small residential scale topography or scale of housing, they're in fact going to be removed, and that's where the LRT will happen. Okay. And again, this is just highlighting the March 21st shadows as a track. Okay. Next one, Matt, please. Yes, thank you. Okay, so as noted, these are two 25-story towers. Their floor plates are about 846 square meters each. The 6-story podium bridges the two towers essentially, and then we have a five-story step back of about 2.5 meters or 3 meters, I believe, as it transitions down to Main Street, and then the podium continues to wrap that 5-story essentially to that corner of Main and Longwood, where it helps kind of get rid of some of that prominence of that podium and step it down as well. We've also, let's get Matt. So we also added, bearing in mind that these are going to be tall buildings, and you're going to have things like wind and whatnot, and we did also integrate some wind canopies and wind breaks, which we'll get into a little bit later as well. What I wanted to note in this slide specifically is the different types of programming that we had considered when looking at the site, and also at the request of the owner as well. The items, I would say, the highlighted in green arrows are the pedestrian connectivity and the elements that essentially we've tried to deploy within the site. The items in blue are more the vehicular, the traffic, and things like loading, refuse, drop-off, delivery, parcel services. So those pieces we'll get into a little bit later. The items with the red arrows pointing to them are going to be those retail patios that we've carefully considered how I'm wrapping as much of that the animation and some of the activity around the entire building as we possibly could. We're essentially wrapping all three sides essentially with potential for, again, retail or restaurant patios. And then the last piece is the connectivity to transit. We are in a corner where you're going to have an LRT stop. It is very important that we have this readily available, that we have it accessible, and that we obviously are mindful of what's going to happen eventually down on Main Street when the LRT does become a reality for us. Okay, next one, Matt, please. This slide just is a quick snapshot of what the ground level programming is. So we'll jump into more of a detailed image next, Matt. Oh, there we go. So I've blocked this out essentially using the similar colors that we had seen in the previous slides. Again, green being the pedestrian portion, having that porosity and that transition, and using that green area as buffers. It is important. Again, it is a high traffic area, as we all know. With the LRT coming, there will be hopefully less traffic, but again, there'll be more of a commuter rail going through. So what we try to do is try to buffer, let's say, the red spaces, the commercial spaces, by allowing for planting and trees, tree canopies. And then on the corner of Long and Main, we really stepped the building back, try to provide even a greater buffer, because that's where you go down to that Innovation Park and you get quite a bit of traffic coming through that area. So we thought by pushing the building a little bit away from that corner, despite everybody always trying to push things towards corners and having urban edges, I think it makes sense to have it step back there. And then those red areas essentially tie themselves to these potential future commercial retail units. We haven't determined exactly what those are going to be, but we have left them essentially as placeholders. And I think as the project develops, that will be programmed a little more closely. The yellow spaces are essentially dedicated to the towers themselves, the residential services, the lobbies, the concierge, the parcel pickup stairs, elevators, bike rooms, and even the pet areas technically reside within the yellow space, but we did want to highlight those that we are we're becoming very aware and conscious how we're going to get our residents down to the south of that property, that nice, gorgeous parkette that Leanne has designed. And then you have the last piece, which is the blue, and that's all your servicing in terms of your loading, your storage, your drop-offs. So we're trying to be very careful how we program that space, so we don't have too much overlap. It's obviously a very tight site because from a topography standpoint, we're about a 10-meter difference from where the buildings reside down to the very bottom of that parkette. So we are somewhat limited to the footprint that we can build on, despite the site looking very large, right? Next slide, Matt.
We're at 10 minutes here, so
we are. Okay.
If you can wrap up relatively quickly, that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, we can do a typical floor plates. We can skip these ones. Just go through those, Matt. Again, typical floor plates, amenities. We have 4 levels of parking essentially. Yeah. Elevations. And again, just a quicker breakdown of programming at grade. This is the rendering of what we see the building essentially looking at along Main Street. And again, that same view, I think that Edward Winter had presented, showing that podium again in its transition and the buffering of that landscape. And then just 2 renderings, one at Longwood and Main, where we had that 5-story podium, and then looking from the highway at the building, you can see the parkette to the left, essentially treed and looking like it's almost like a naturalized area. Next map. And then the wind study, we had a wind study conducted. Essentially, there was no uncomfortable areas as noted within the report. Okay, Matt. And then Leanne.
Thank you, Shem. We're over time, I know already, but I need no more than 2 minutes. So just building a little bit on what Shem has said, the proximity of the building face of the curb allows really comfortable pedestrian realm, has a hierarchy of experiences there. There is the sidewalk adjacent to the traffic lanes, then the sodded boulevard with trees. And then they serve as a transitioning scale to the building itself as well. And then up against the building is a paved surface. There's canopies that Shem has included in his design. And within that space, we have seating, we have bike parking, access to the commercial units, as well as dedicated access to each lobby. At the corner of Main and Longwood, we've extended the surface area to provide for a bit of a plaza feel and the opportunity there for seating as well. I'm going to jump now to the slope. So next slide, please, Matt, to the slope and the lower land. Sorry, I'm recovering from a cold. My voice is not very strong today. The slope itself is going to be rehabilitated and enhanced with caliper trees and whips, non-woody material, and micro terracing to help reestablish that slope. At the limits of the grading is where vegetation will be preserved. Those, of course, will be determined and confirmed through site plan. The next, oh no, I'm on this is good, see here. Yeah, thanks. The lower lands here are such a fantastic and unique opportunity for a development like this. It's a park. These lands are currently private, and the plan is to keep them that way. There are stairs and ramping that provide access down to the space from residents. And there are pedestrian safe accesses out of each tower that were shown on Shem's plan, where there's no requirement to cross traffic. We worked very carefully on that to provide that. And in that lower land, there's space that provides walking trails, seating opportunities for passive leisure. And there's rain gardens designed in there also to help with stormwater management. Overall, the space is about 2 acres, and the walking trails provide about a 318 meter loop. And the last slide for me is the rooftop amenity. At this stage, the drawing, it's in design intent concept at this point, but the intent for this rooftop is going to be to provide shaded and open air seating areas and barbecues, dining, lounging, and some gathering space for the residents of the building. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentations. At this time, we provide an opportunity for each of the panel members to seek clarification on any points and achieve further explanation. Please hold your comments until the comments section, just questions only. We'll start with Ted.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentations. I may have missed this, but could you tell us, is this rental or condominium?
At this point, no commitments have been made on the ultimate tenure. The developer is well versed in both models, and they're both out there for consideration. And the decision won't be made until we get further into a more tangible schedule in terms of bringing this to market.
Thank you. Looking at the wind study, I'm having trouble understanding how the pre-development and post-development are actually very close to one another, even though there's two 24-story towers and a lower Port Cochere wind tunnel condition. They seem we don't see any uncomfortable spaces here. Can you articulate on how that was achieved, or the veracity of the method that's been used here?
We actually had a lunch and learn in the office yesterday on wind studies, which was really beneficial for our team. You know, we don't have our consultant with us today, but you know, I'd have to defer to him. But I believe that, you know, the combination of the firm podium and its building step backs would help mitigate wind impacts. But that would be something that we could make himself available to clarify that with staff on a go-forward basis.
Thank you. And the City of Hamilton has recently put out a sustainability recommendations and guidelines. Can you tell us how you're working towards those recommendations?
Sure, thank you. So again, this developer is well versed in sustainable buildings, completing a number of geothermal and passive house certified buildings that have been completed. So at this point, those commitments carry over here, where it will certainly be passive house inspired. Whether or not it's certified remains to be seen, but geothermal would be another sustainable element that is going to be deployed here.
Thank you. Those were my questions. Thanks very much.
Dana?
Hi, thanks for your presentation. I'm just wondering if you guys can provide me the tower separation between, I think it's building B, the closest to the west, to the closest of the Camelot towers offsite on the other property. Do you happen to have that dimension? I know I see you have like a 3 and 9 meter tower setback to the interior lot line, which is irregular. I'm just wondering if you have the distance to the tower face.
I'd have to dive into the actual Revit file to pull that out.
Okay, no, it's fine. I've just adjust my comments accordingly. Thanks. That's everything.
Jennifer Sisson?
Thank you. I wanted to say thanks, Edward, Matt, Shem, and Nan for your presentations. Very helpful. I had a couple of questions. Some of them have been answered already. One thing I was wondering about is if you had consideration for how maintenance vehicles and things like that are going to be getting down into what I'm going to call your backyard park. I think you mentioned it as a parkette, but it's a big feature, so I'm going to call it a park.
So we previously had a Hamilton Conservation Authority permit to do the slope work. Leanne, would you be comfortable just elaborating on the design intent and how that will be accessed and maintained?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand the question. The question is, how is access being provided down to the space?
Yeah, and in particular for maintenance vehicles, are they using that central loop to get into the back and then the ramps going down? I'm assuming with something of this scale, you'd need bigger maintenance.
Yeah, the ramp, they would use ramping. And that was a consideration that we did when we were sizing those, thinking that it would only be very small equipment that's going down there, because it's not a public facility, and it's actually going to be designed with sustainability in mind. So we have material down there with a goal that it's going to be fairly self-sustaining once it's established. So work on the slope itself would be by foot. And then at the lower level, it would be small equipment that could fit within the width of the ramping that's being provided, which is, of course, also AODA accessible.
Thank you.
Well,
My other question was about the sun shadow study. It showed some of the houses to the north being modeled kind of set back from Main Street. Is that kind of blank space where some of the existing houses have not been shown, like modeled, like similar to there are a couple white boxes of houses shown north of that? Is that the area that is the LRT expropriation that was mentioned?
Yes, that's correct. I would say from Westdale School over almost to where Camelot Towers are, most of that's been expropriated. We also, the White House that we did model was available to us from a 3D model we were able to essentially get from the city. But yes, a lot of those houses to the north are or have been already expropriated. There's fencing up currently showing that's been all hoarded off now.
Okay, thank you. That's all of my questions.
I
Joey?
could just touch on the one question that was asked about tower separation. I was able to just do a quick check, and the Camelot Tower building is set back more than 25 meters within its own property line. So we'd have to do I didn't do the next step of math for the ultimate separation, but it's beyond 25 meters.
Thank you.
Thanks. Joey, any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, just one question. It was mentioned that this project had gone through, I'll assume, extensive process and approvals, and it was approved. Is there a reason why we're starting from scratch, or we're seeing this project today?
Thank you. So as I mentioned, the original proponent was really Columbia College, and that was a real purpose-built student rental.
So it's a different client altogether.
Different client altogether.
Oh,
The approval ultimately accommodated multiple dwellings. It wasn't limited to a student residence, but because it was scoped with that intent, it was literally a boys' tower and a girls' tower was how it was envisioned. And with the new proponent coming on stream, going to whether it be market rental or ownership, we wanted to revisit things for all of the reasons in terms of its context. We really see it as an opportunity to optimize density without adverse impact, and that's where we said there's merit in exploring height increase from 18 to 24.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. That clarifies things. Thanks, Matt.
I have one additional question before we close the Q&A session. Since so much work is being done in the ravine, I assume an arborist report is required, if not completed already?
Yes. to both. There was one that was done before partially, and it's being updated kind of as we speak. Mhm.
Okay. Now we'll move on to the comment section, and each panel member will provide feedback, starting with Ted.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say again, thank you for your presentation. I do appreciate the density that's being brought to this site. It's appropriate in this location, and it serves a market. It makes sense. So I would also say that the landscape effort is very laudable in terms of serving the residents with an amenity at that lower space within the ravine. I think that's a great feature, and I think we need to build on that though. So I think with a development like this, where that's coming forward and requesting an increased height and density, it's removing all of the trees from a ravine space, and it's casting some pretty significant shadows on the neighbors. I think the question would be, what is this development giving back to the public space, to the public realm, to the community beyond density? And I think this ravine space is potentially that. I've heard it said that this is private space, and I would question that. If this would be a perfect opportunity for a POPs, a privately owned public space that is open to the community. When we look at the site, there's 3 main streets terminating onto Main Street. There's a transit corridor coming from Westdale, so a lot of residents having access to the site, and a new transit corridor. And as well, we have to imagine Longwood Road having a future that has bike lanes and sidewalks, allowing students to move from McMaster to the Innovation Campus, particularly as it likely grows. So, I think the opportunity to connect the sidewalk and the community to this public space would be, I think, a really beneficial offering to the entire community. There's not a lot of park space at the south end of Westdale, and I think that there's an opportunity to connect in a greater way to Longwood Road. That's actually level to the street currently, and right now it doesn't look like you can move around this building as a resident or a member of the community, and it doesn't look like you can move along the top of the ravine. And I think you could connect to Longwood. You could connect to your neighbors who have a space, parking space along the top of that ravine, and you could really create a system of movement for the people who live along that space, who could move along the southern edge of those developments. And I think that would be a great amenity to offer here. And then when we start to look at how the residents access this space, I think there are improvements there. When we look at this open space, it's that you pass through. I think this is a great amenity, but it could probably just be one roundabout and not 2, with a lay-by on both sides that serves your lobbies. And that would allow for some real pedestrian space to move through this lower level, open it up, take those garbage niches that create bays and push into that space, pull those back, and have some real pedestrian space out to the back to this great amenity that you're offering. And I think you can take pathways, sidewalks through there. I don't think we need to avoid an overlap of pedestrian movement and traffic. And I guess the criticism is that the traffic movement has taken precedent here at grade, and I think we need to invert that somewhat. And then when you do get out to that grand stair that takes you down, can there be a cantilever that has some greater scale of pedestrian quality that opens up and bows and shapes appropriately in scale to the opening between those 2 buildings? Right now, it seems like a very narrow sidewalk that gets you to this stair. And I think if this is the grand gesture you're proposing, I think it needs to be in scale with that porte cochere and in scale with the ravine space. It's a very narrow connection point, and I think that could be improved improved. In terms of the architecture, I feel like these buildings are taller than they should be when I look at the shadows. I feel that the floor plate looks the area, I don't know, and I meant to ask the question, I didn't, but the floor plates look larger than what the tall guidelines in Hamilton allow for. And even if that were the case, I think the towers need more articulation to make them appear thinner, a bit more elegant. And I question whether they want to be the same height, whether they vary in some way. One's taller, one's lower. You know, do they have some differentiation in terms of the architectural articulation? I feel there's more work that could be done there. Having said all that, bringing density to the site, I think, is great. And if that park could really become a community amenity, that would be an offering that would, I think, make this all fit a lot better into the community. Those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ted. Dana?
Thanks very much for your presentation. I do appreciate that you've been able to fully wrap the buildings with active use, including the commercial at grade. I think the greenery to the south is as excellent. I would agree with everything Ted has said around the connectivity, both from the street and for existing residents to that space. I'm not sure it's well defined enough in terms of how even the residents can access that space, let alone people moving from the sidewalks, given that there's a lot of future potential for redevelopment in this area. To really increase the scale and the accessibility to that space, I think would be a great improvement. So in terms of buildings, so you've gone up in height, but you have kept the floor plate at 845 square meters. That might work a little better for a smaller scale building, but as you move up to 25 stories, I would encourage you to consider maybe the reduction to 750 square meters to better articulate the towers, but also to give you further tower setback along the west, which is slightly less than what is permitted by the tall building guidelines. It's hard to know what the future potential of the other site would be, but maintaining a setback between the offsite towers, you mentioned they're currently 25 meters or greater, but ensuring that prevails even in redevelopment. And then reducing the towers down to something that is around the 750 mark would help you also with that interior side yard setback. So considering the floor plate size, that setback as you move towards further articulation of the towers would be a good thing. Ted touched on relative height. I think that could be a beneficial thing to do, is have towers that are more distinct, but also keep the cohesiveness between the towers, but more visually distinct. And I think you could do that from staggering the relative height of the buildings. I see you have a public art opportunity located at the corner of Longwood and Main. I see that's off-site. I would encourage you to develop that as public art as part of this project. We've talked about contribution to the public, contribution to the city of Hamilton. I think that's something that you should do, perhaps with an encroachment permit with the city, but as part of this development, I think that would be a strong asset to the overall building and site design. And lastly, I just looked at the tower floor plate, the parking garage layout, and noticed that the bike parking locations aren't that close to elevators. So just ensuring that your bike parking are well connected to the elevators through pedestrian safe access. Otherwise, that's everything from me.
Thanks, Dana. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer. So I would have to agree with pretty much everything Ted and Dana have said. Particularly want to echo their comments on the park space. I think that should really be publicly accessible, and that could become more of a community amenity, as well as touching on the floor plate being too large. I agree wholeheartedly with what they've said there. I do want to commend you for a couple of things. I think integrating a public art opportunity is fantastic. I'm happy to see the provision of bike parking and that it's close to the active frontages in the lobbies here, and that you've given a really significant amenity space to this project. I don't think we've ever seen anything with quite this much outdoor amenity space. So wanted to commend you for that, and that you put a lot of thought into the programming for that space as well. So thank you for providing that. However, I do have some concerns over that space, and mostly in its proximity to the highway. And if it remains private, I have some concerns over how well utilized it will be by just the residents of the building. I think it would be better to have it accessed by the public, both to just provide a service for the community, but also to invite more people into the space. I think, as Ted said, this area isn't terribly well serviced with park spaces, and it could be such a resource for the area. One other thing I wanted to touch on is, and this may come through further detailed design, is I didn't see any lighting design considered for this area. It might be something that you'll need to consider in the future for safety. And while I think it's good that you've shown kind of like the tree planting as a bit of a buffer and a fence towards the end, perhaps considering a noise wall or even a berm might be helpful to start to mitigate some of the highway noise and pollutants that we'd expect in an area that's right beside a 400 series highway. One other thing that I had a small, I wouldn't say a small concern with, but I understand that there are constraints to the site, and in order to develop the building, you need a lot of that space for grading. However, I would love to see some creative grading or some redevelopment of the site design that allows you to save more of those existing trees, because that could also be a really good feature of this design that helps to bring people into that space immediately by creating more of a sense of enclosure. I think that's most of my comments. Overall, I think this is a really interesting development. You've got that really significant outdoor amenity space component, which I'm really excited about. And I'm always happy to see development like this with more density on a existing vacant lot. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Jen. Over to you, Joey.
Thanks, Jennifer. And thanks again for the presentations. I agree with Matt and Shem's comments about the need for more density on this site. I had asked about the previous proposal because my understanding of it, it was a little bit smaller. The program was less intense, and it also gave kind of an opportunity to articulate things within the given footprint for the building. I think what's happened with this current version is that you're trying very hard to create more density, go a little bit taller, go a little bit bigger, and it's filled up the site maybe a little bit too much. And I think what it's resulted in a tower that reads on some sides like it's going right from grade all the way to the top, which is overwhelming ×2. And then the podium, it doesn't give opportunity for podium depth. So unfortunately, the podium sort of reads as somewhat skin deep rather than significantly being a true element along the road and having the towers pulled back a little bit. I mean, it's a difficult thing to do, especially when you're adding more program to it. And I think what also complicates it is the absolute rigor in the design and the symmetry of the complex. I think that symmetry is making it a little bit more difficult to potentially give opportunities, as mentioned by my colleagues, give opportunities at grade, have more investment in the public realm, and also be able to kind of move around the site a little bit better. And I think we can't, and I know it's been brought up, but we absolutely cannot ignore that the larger footprint, half of it, is a potential for semi-private, public, but this park space that needs to really sort of weigh in, not only for the residents of the building, but also for the residents of the larger community. So thank you for that. I understand how difficult it is to, develop, go through these processes and really sort of try to take on an intense program in density. So, and then also at the same time, try to deal with a very kind of difficult site and topography. So thank you for that. And I'm interested to see how this continues to develop moving forward.
Thanks, Joey. I have a few comments and then a few comments in summary. I agree with everything my colleagues have said. This is such a unique site. I don't think we've ever seen such a investment in amenity, outdoor amenity space. It's a great opportunity to make it impact more than just the residents of that building. So I think I support my colleagues in the strategy to open it up, availability to others. Given that this project started as a student residence, McMaster is close by. There'll be a high proportion of young people there. Maybe that park needs to be a running loop. Maybe it already is. I don't know, but kids out running the loop. Maybe that stair can be really wide, so it's wider so that people can go up, run up and down the stair. I think activation, the program of physical activation in the site needs to be thought about. I agree with, I think, Jen's comments about site safety. It needs to be well lit. It needs to be a place where people can jog it, in the evening and feel okay about it. But again, such a great opportunity to make such a fabulous space. I agree with the comments about the towers feeling a bit too large, and I have nothing against height. I think it's a matter of them feeling a bit bulky, and either a thinner floor plate or some variation in height or in texture would alleviate that feeling of them being too much of a wall, both on the Main Street side and from the view from the highway. I noticed the unit mix has a high proportion of studios at 17% and 52% one beds. And again, that's aligned with student accommodation. That's great. But as you transition either into a condo or rental for the broader public, I would encourage the inclusion of some 3-bedroom units. Other cities have, family-friendly guidelines where they do encourage larger units so that it's not just a place for higher turnover of younger people, but that families can actually make it a home for longer. Those are all my comments. Congratulations. This is a pretty exciting project and an incredible site. At this point, the proponents can take this time to ask any questions or offer any clarifications on the comments that have been given.
I think there was a lot of great feedback. There's a lot of good take homes that we can go back to with our project team and the consultant and the owners to look at what we can incorporate in terms of what we heard today. So, Shen, Leanne, any other thoughts?
No, thank you very much for the comments. I was jotting things down as they're being listed. It's a lot of great feedback, and I really appreciate that.
Yes, same. Thank you. And we agree. It's a very exciting project. It's a lot of fun to work on.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, everyone. The meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. We'll look to rejoin at 2:45 for the second meeting.
Thanks.